Morning, everyone. We're going to begin today speaking a little about Yom HaShoah. We'll go to Masechta, we'll go obviously to stand for the siren. We'll move on to Masechta Middos and then to the I wanted to begin talking about the Shoah, or the Yom HaShoah, using a very famous piece of the Or Sameach in the Meshech Chochmah, perhaps his most famous piece, the most famous quote. Meir Simcha of Devinsk, who lived in the early 1900s, wrote a pirush ala Torah called the Meshech Chochmah. And in Parshas Bechukosai, where we have the first Tochacha, where the Ribono Shel Olam says, if you show me Torah mitzvahs, you will have the rewards of Olam Hazeh, and of course you will move to Olam Haba, although Olam Haba is not mentioned specifically in the Torah. And God forbid, if you're not showing me Torah mitzvahs, other things will, God forbid, happen to you. And as the Meir Simcha of Devinsk in his Meshech Chochmah speaks about the Tochacha, about Jews in a period of time where they're chas v'shalom not showing the Torah mitzvahs, he talks about the phases that the Jewish people go through as they're in Golus. In the middle of this discussion about the phases, he says the following: the Jews get into Golus, unfortunately, and then when they're in Golus, they get very comfortable. And they become comfortable, and I'm not talking now about the Shmivas Torah mitzvahs. That's his discussion there in the Meshech Chochmah. But he uses a phrase in Parshas Bechukosai, Perek Chavav, Pasuk Mem Daled, Yachshov ki Berlin hi Yerushalayim. Jewish people will begin to think that Berlin is Jerusalem. That's what the Meshech Chochmah writes. And when Jews begin to think that Berlin, the cultured Berlin, wonderful Berlin, Yamak Shemam, wonderful Berlin is Jerusalem. After all, in Berlin, Torah Mosdos was set up, Chesed Mosdos was set up. Wonderful. Everything seemed to have been flourishing in Torah and Avodas Hashem. The fact that anti-Semitism was rampant all around them was irrelevant because they were able to be shomer Torah mitzvahs. There's no shmad. The fact that we're not in Eretz Yisrael, Berlin Yerushalayim, Berlin can replace Yerushalayim. And when Jews get to this idea that Berlin hi Yerushalayim, the Meshech Chochmah says, "Az yavai ruach soya v'sar, yaka oso migizo, yanicheu l'goy merochek, asher l'lamad yeshoinoi, yeda ki hu ger." The Ribono Shel Olam will bring a hurricane. He'll bring strong winds to blow the Jews out of that place, and they will have to go to another strange land, where again they will feel like they are strangers in the land. This is the Meshech Chochmah's literally prophetic words before the Shoah. That when Jews say Berlin is Jerusalem, a wind, a storm will come and blow them away to another land where they will there again feel like they're strangers in the land. And when you feel like you're a stranger in the land, you yearn to go home. Much of this is about yearning to go home. The Ribono Shel Olam waits for us to yearn to go home. And when we don't yearn to go home, the Ribono Shel Olam creates a situation where we yearn to go home. So the Ribono Shel Olam blew in the winds, as the Meshech Chochmah says, in the late 1930s, 1940s. He blew in the wind. Jews were then killed. Those who fled, either fled to that time Palestine, fled to America, fled to South America. They went to different places. And the purpose of them fleeing at that time was simply to save their lives. Some of them who went to that time Palestine, went to Palestine to help build Eretz Yisrael. But everybody was fleeing to save their lives. And after years went by, they again got comfortable in their new homes, in their new places. And again, lo yaleinu, the danger of another wind coming and blowing them away so that they would yearn to go back home would come. And that's the Meshech Chochmah. Yachshov ki Berlin hi Yerushalayim. People will think that Berlin is Jerusalem. Berlin's not Jerusalem. Berlin was the place from which the Shoah and the murder of 6 million innocent men, women, and children came from. Berlin wasn't Jerusalem, but people got comfortable in Berlin. And Monsey is not Jerusalem, and Williamsburg is not Jerusalem, and Lakewood is not Jerusalem. We have tremendous rachmanis and tremendous empathy for what's going on in the whole world. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's world, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Bria. But we also understand that the Rebbeinu Shalom is talking to the Bria. He's talking to all mankind with an expectation that we hear what he says, an expectation that we're going to change, and an expectation that we're not praying to go back to the way things used to be. We want a new world, we want a better world. And after the Shoah, there were those people who wanted to create a new reality. They wanted to create a new world. And that new world became the process of Kibbutz Goliath in Middos Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. There were those who objected to that idea, which we're not going to discuss today. But what has happened is people have gone to places and have reestablished themselves as if Lakewood hi Yerushalayim, as if Williamsburg hi Yerushalayim, as if Monsey hi Yerushalayim, as if Crown Heights hi Yerushalayim. Aval Rabbi Sai, it's very hard for me to say these words. Puk Chazi, the Lashon of Chazal, go out and look at the Metzius. Puk Chazi, leave your home, within 100 meters, of course. Leave your home and take a look at what the Metzius is. Nebuch Rabbeinu Shalom. We read it every day in the news. Borough Park is hit. Monsey is hit. Lakewood is hit. Williamsburg is hit. What is the Rabbeinu Shalom talking to us? What does he say? I'll leave that up to you to figure out. But if the people in these places continue to talk about Lakewood is Jerusalem, Williamsburg is our Jerusalem, Monsey is our Jerusalem, Crown Heights is our Jerusalem, B'chulu, B'chulu, then lo yaleinu, the Rebbeinu Shalom is going to continue to try to get their attention until they realize that they're not in Jerusalem. So I read a very distressing piece last night. It was very late at night. It was not at night, it was early morning. It kept me very distressed for a while and I couldn't go to sleep. There was an article in a Jewish publication that the caption of the article is "The New Normal." And the new normal talks about weddings and what God is telling us about weddings. And the letter is, this article, it's a letter, it's signed by certain Rabbonim in America. And the article says, the letter says, we hear God talking. There is going to be a new normal. We can't go back to the way things were. We spend too much money on chasanas. And now that chasanas have become such a difficult thing to make, but we've learned how to make chasanas in much smaller gatherings. Therefore, we, the undersigned, make the following decree or takana or suggestion that chasanas should be limited as follows. The family of the chassan and the kala, 250 guests, the friends of the chassan and the kala, and then anyone that doesn't fit into that can be invited to a sudas chassan v'kala after the meal. Now this is what they learned from the Magefa that struck the world, and the Magefa that struck Borough Park, Williamsburg, Crown Heights, Muncie. And according to a news report several days ago, there have been 50 Levias in Lakewood. We know that there are Gedolim, Gaonim, Tzadikim that have passed away. And the message that they hear is that we need to limit weddings because God's talking to us. And we hear God teaching us how to limit spending our money. So we're going to limit this to 250 guests. Of course, the family, of course, the chassan kala's friends, and of course, simchas chassan v'kala afterwards. When we were children, we played a game called telephone. Person A whispered to person B, who whispered to person C, who whispered to person D, and it was like a funny game. The question was what the last person who was whispered to would say the message was. And generally speaking, what would happen is the first person's message to the second person, by the time it got to the 20th person, was garbled. And the 20th person said, this is what the message is. It usually turned out not to be the message because it passed through so many different people. Rabbi Say, God is talking to each of us, and I've said this, he's talking, this is not a one size fits all for everyone, but he's talking to us. The Tolner Rebbe, a Shlita, a couple of weeks ago, gave a shiur, and you were able to listen to shiur over the phone. And he said, Rabbi Say, obviously life is going to change, and it's going to change for the better. And we've now learned that you can make a chasna with small family and with 10 people. We've learned how to do that. And it's beautiful. My wife and I took a walk before all the Horaot, but when 100 people could not get together, in the Ayalon Park, there was a beautiful chuppah set up for a very small wedding. And people stood around taking pictures of this beautiful scene. It's beautiful, the Ayalon Park, trees, grass, a chuppah. It's a beautiful place to make a wedding. And it was going to be a small wedding. And the wedding would be a wedding, and the couple, B'ezras Hashem, will have children, bonim, b'nei bonim. And for Rabbonim, and again, this is difficult for me to say, but something needs to be said. For Rabbonim who are respected in America to say that we hear God talking to us, and we need to cut the expenditures of weddings to 250 people plus, means that the game of telephone hasn't reached you yet. You don't have very good klita in how God's talking. God's talking, obviously, he doesn't talk directly to us. It goes through a malach, next malach, next malach, next malach, until it finally reaches us on some level of Ruach HaKodesh or Nevuah or whatever we're going to call it. But we're not on the madrega of Moshe Rabbeinu of Pe'el Pe'adaba Boy. So we get these messages from the Ribono Shel Olam, and perhaps we're not hearing properly because we need God to talk to us directly, more directly. And God forbid, we don't want God to have to tap us on the shoulder and give us a little more direct information about what he expects of us. We're going through this coronavirus, and we need to be very, very attuned to God talking to us. The same way that after 6 million Jews died, people needed to be attuned to what God was saying. They needed to be attuned before 6 million Jews were killed, as the Meshech Chochmah says. Berlin, Yerushalayim. People were not attuned to the idea that Berlin cannot be your Jerusalem, because if you think Berlin is Jerusalem, a wind will come in, uproot you, and send you somewhere else where you feel uncomfortable and a stranger, and you'll yearn to go back to Eretz Yisrael. And this was the warning of the Meshech Chochmah. And most people did not heed that warning. Most people were not prepared to make the sacrifice, and instead they made the ultimate sacrifice. It's brought down b'shem the Baal Shem Tov that the Rebbeinu Shalom said to Avraham Avinu twice, Lech Lecha. The first time the Rebbeinu Shalom said to Avraham Avinu Lech Lecha was to leave his home and go to Eretz Yisrael. Lech Lecha me'artzcha me'moladetcha mibeis avicha la'aretz asher arecha. Go, leave your home, leave your comfortable surroundings, and go to Eretz Yisrael. The second time the Rebbeinu Shalom said Lech Lecha to Avraham Avinu was Lech Lecha Eretz HaMoriah. Go to the Har HaBayis and bring Yitzchak to me as a korban on the Akedah. And of course, Akedah has now come to be the contracted version of Al Kiddush Hashem. We see this on Matzevus La'aleinu, person that died in the Shoah, post-Shoah, but had family that died in the Shoah. We write that they died Akedah, Al Kiddush Hashem. So the Baal Shem Tov says that the Rebbeinu Shalom told Avraham Avinu, Lech Lecha me'artzecha and Lech Lecha l'Eretz HaMoriah. You're going to have a choice, Avraham, for generations. You can either get up, leave your home, and go to Eretz Yisrael. Or Nebuch, you're going to have to get up and leave your home and go to an Akedah. Of course, the Akedah turns out to be Yitzchak living, and a shore was brought tachas the Yitzchak korban, but an Akedah it was. And we have these choices, and the Klal Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz have this choice on Yom HaShoah, most of whom ignore Yom HaShoah for reasons that it's Chodesh Nisan, it's not the right time to do it. It was established by Medinas Yisrael, so therefore it's treif, or any other reasons that they don't observe or even think about Yom HaShoah. But we're going to soon hear a siren. And there's a lot of discussion about what this siren means. There's a lot of discussion about whether you should pause for the siren. A lot of discussion of whether you should stand up for the siren. We're used to hearing a siren when there's an ambulance. We're used to hearing a siren when there's a police car. We're used to hearing a siren when there's a fire truck coming. A siren tells us that there's an emergency. There's an emergency. You get out of the way because there's a sick person in an ambulance. Get out of the way because there's a building on fire and the fire department needs to get there. Get out of the way because the police have to go and save someone's life or break up some violent confrontation. Get out of the way, there's an emergency. Lives need to be saved. We're in a matzif now, where Yom HaShoah, and the siren has a very special meaning. The siren is a note to stop what you're doing and bow your head and think about what the Shoah means, and for this year, what coronavirus means. But it's an emergency. The siren is telling us there's an emergency. There are houses burning. There are violent confrontations in the world. And there are sick people that are being taken in ambulances, sick people in hospitals. There's an emergency siren that's going to go off. And as we hear the siren and we bend our heads, and close our eyes, we should think about those who fell in the Shoah, those who had the courage to fight in the Shoah, and those who taught us the lesson of how to yearn to go back home. And we're in an emergency now. We're in an emergency because there are so many of our Yiddelach in America who don't hear the siren and don't know that the house is burning and don't know that the ambulances that they hear in Lakewood and Muncie taking people to the hospital, those are ambulance sirens that don't just mean someone's going to the hospital. Those are sirens that mean get up, wake up, and change your life. We here in Eretz Yisrael heard the siren. There's an emergency. When there's an emergency, you can pick up the phone and dial for the police, for the ambulance, for the fire department. And you can deal with the emergency, or you can ignore the emergency with all the ramifications of the failure to act. The siren tells us that there's an emergency. There are fires burning. I've yet, perhaps I missed it, but I've yet to hear a single Poisek, Gadol, in Chutz La'aretz, specifically in America, say that I hear the siren. I hear there's an emergency. Rabbi Isai, we're stuck in America. This is the Meshech Chochmah Berlin Yerushalayim. We're again stuck in Muncie, Lakewood, Williamsburg, and Crown Heights with all kind of justifications and hashkafa that say that we should stay here and keep on calling the ambulances to take our victims to the morgues or the hospitals. And Emir Hashem, there'll be a new normal. We'll only have 250 people plus weddings. There'll be a new normal. And this is why the Rebbeinu Shalom is talking to us and taking away so many HaShoah people, so that we'll have these kind of weddings. Instead of the 500 people weddings, we'll have 250 people weddings. We we pray, we yearn that Klal Yisrael around the world hears the siren that we just heard, that the Ribono Shel Olam's message, where he's talking to everybody, but it seems that some people don't hear it clearly. Ribono Shel Olam, have rachmanis on them and talk to them more clearly without punishing them. Send your message to them more clearly without having more ambulances. Send your message to them more clearly without more levias. But they have to hear the message more clearly. They have to yearn, and from the yearning come to Eretz Yisrael, and help us here with the Kibbutz Goliath, and help us here make this Medinas Yisrael a pure place of Kedusha, of Avodas Hashem. Today we commemorate so many of those, especially those who were able to escape the Shoah and came and fought and created the place that we're now sitting and Zooming in. The fact that we're here Zooming and we have the ability to learn in the middle of the coronavirus in a place where there's Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasadim is due to the sacrifice of so many who fled the Shoah. Some of them died here. Some of them, many of them left behind families who died in the Shoah. They came here to build something. And build they did. And they left it for us to make it a better place. And if you have complaints about Eretz Yisrael, don't sit back and complain about it. Come here in droves. Come here in droves and change it. Don't sit in your fancy dining rooms in Muncie and Lakewood and tell us about how terrible the problems are in Eretz Yisrael. I sit here in Eretz Yisrael, I can tell you about what's going on in Muncie and Lakewood. And it's not a pretty picture when you see it on the news. And this too shall pass, and there'll be a new normal in Lakewood and Muncie, is divrei chira v'giduf against the Ribono Shel Olam. It is kfira against the Ribono Shel Olam to go through such a situation and to come out of it with these silly takonis, to create a new normal in Lakewood, to create a new normal in Muncie, to create a new normal in Williamsburg, to create a new normal in Crown Heights. You will never have a new normal in those places. You will only have a normal, healthy life, both in Gashmias and in Ruchnias, when you yearn for Eretz Yisrael and you start coming in droves to Eretz Yisrael. That's when your lives will broaden. And if you think you're learning so much Torah and Chutz La'aretz in all these places, so we're going to go now to Masechta Middos, and after we count Sfira, we talk about Binyan Beis HaMikdash, Rachmon Yachzlon Avodas Beis HaMikdash, the Koima, the Mehev Mina Meitzela. And after Shemona Esrei, you say, Sheyibana Beis HaMikdash Umher V'Yameinu V'Sein Chalkeinu B'Sei Vasecha. There'll be a Beis HaMikdash. And when there's a Beis HaMikdash, we're going to get our true share in Torah, and we're going to be able to learn Torah in a much higher level. Those who want to learn Torah, and those who are truly dedicated to learning Torah, and who want to learn Torah on a higher level, a better level, with a deeper understanding, you don't have to go to your Sforim stores to buy more and more Sforim for your deeper understanding. Before Sein Chelkeinu B'Sei Vasecha, there's going to be a Binyan Beis HaMikdash. So if you yearn to learn Torah, and unfortunately your neshama has become Berlin Hi Yerushalayim, and you don't yet yearn for Eretz Yisrael, and you don't yet yearn for the Beis HaMikdash for all your corrupted hashkafas, then at least yearn for the Beis HaMikdash so that you can learn Torah better. Lakewood's not Yerushalayim. It's not Yerushalayim. It never will be Yerushalayim. The only Makom Asher Yivcha Hashem, the only place that's called the Beis HaBechira, is on the Har HaBayis in Yerushalayim in Eretz Yisrael. But before we go to the Masechta Middos, I want to say something that I talked about at the Shabbos HaGodol Drasha. People were talking about the shuls being closed down. And I note, if you haven't seen it yet, a letter from Rabbi Berkowitz in Sanhedrin Mochevet, an amazing letter about people should continue their balcony minyanim and not go out into the open air minyanim. And he explains why it's just not a controllable situation. It's a very important letter to see. Anybody that wants to see the letter, it's been circulated, and I have a copy of the letter. But people, when the shuls got locked down, started yearning. Ay Rabbeinu Shalom, please let the shuls open again. Rabbeinu Shalom, please let the Beis Medrash open again. I want to go daven in shul. I want to go learn in the Beis Medrash. And I asked a simple question at the Shabbos HaGodol Drasha. Is that what our tefillah should be directed at this time? Has anybody heard the siren yet? Has anybody heard a siren yet? The shuls are closed down because the Misrad HaBriyut closed it down. And now we want the Misrad HaBriyut to open it up. Is that why you think the shuls are closed? Because Yaakov Litzman ordered them closed? You think the shuls are closed down because Benjamin Netanyahu ordered them closed? Why do you think they're closed? They're closed because the Rebbeinu Shalom wants them closed. But why does the Rebbeinu Shalom want the shuls closed? He wants the shuls closed because a long time ago, the Nevi'im told us that when we go into Golus, they told us that our shuls will be v'eilahem lemikdash ma'at. I'm going to give the Jewish people a miniature Beis HaMikdash. And the miniature Beis HaMikdash is going to be the shuls. And you'll be able to go down to the shuls. But they're miniatures. They're miniatures. The Rebbeinu Shalom, through Netanyahu, Litzman, he used all kinds of shluchim. He closed down the shuls. The multi-million-dollar structures that we build, which are fine and dandy, and they'll come into good use, as the Gemara talks about in Megillah. They'll come into fine use when Mashiach comes. But they're miniatures. And maybe the time comes where we should talk to the Rebbeinu Shalom and say, Rebbeinu Shalom, I don't want the miniature anymore. I want the real thing. I want the Bayis HaGodol VaKodesh Shenikra Shimcha Olav. I spent my $2 million, $3 million on the shul, and it's closed. Rebbeinu Shalom, the Seder. I want to go to the Beis HaMikdash. I want to go to the big house. I don't want the miniature anymore. How long can you play with Lego? You mature, you want to go to Playmobil. You mature, you want to go to construct. People mature, even children mature in what they yearn for. Is the yearning now, Rebbeinu Shalom, please give me back the shul? Or is the tefillas, Rebbeinu Shalom, I got them, I hear you. I hear the siren, I hear the emergency. And I yearn for the Beis HaMikdash. And that's what we have to focus on, the yearning for the Beis HaMikdash. And as I explained yesterday, the Pachad Yitzchak in different Mamorim, in Mamori Pesach, talks about the fact that yearning for the Beis HaMikdash is part of the process of building the Beis HaMikdash. We say in Psukei de Zimra every day, it's a kapitel Tehillah, Mizmor Shir Chanukas Habayis LeDavid. David didn't build the Bayis. David didn't build the Beis HaMikdash. That's Mismashich Hanukas HaBayis LaDavid. The Chinuch HaBeis HaMikdash of David. It's Shlomo's Beis HaMikdash. It's not David, the Medrash asks. And as Rav Hutner explains, David desperately passionately wanted to build the Beis HaMikdash. And he asked the Ribono Shlom to let him build the Beis HaMikdash. And the Ribono Shlom said no, for whatever reason, Shlomo will build it. And Rav Hutner says that David HaMelech's tzipiyah, David HaMelech's passion, his desire, his yearning to build the Beis HaMikdash is part and parcel of building the Beis HaMikdash. It's not only putting up the walls that build the Beis HaMikdash. It's yearning to put up the walls. That's part and parcel of building the Beis HaMikdash. Yearning to build the Beis HaMikdash is part of its construction. And we can't replace that yearning with anything else. The new normal is not going to be to go back to the old chasanis, but reduce them from 500 or 800 people to 250 people. That's silliness. The new normal is going to be that we yearn for new kinds of things. We yearn for a new world. We yearn for a world where the Beis HaMikdash is the center of the world, not places in New York being the center of the world. The Harabayas, the Beis HaMikdash, that is the center of the world, and we yearn for that to become again the center of the world. We're going to now go to Masechta Middos. We thus far have learned that there's a mitzvah d'oraisa. Is one of the 248 positive commandments is that the Beis HaMikdash have guards. And there's also one of the 248 positive commandments and one of the 365 negative commandments. The Beis HaMikdash has to have guards. We learn out that these guards are Kohanim and Leviim. The Mishnah told us that the Kohanim guarded the Beis HaMikdash in 3 places. And today's subject is going to be where the Leviim guarded the Beis HaMikdash. They guarded the Beis HaMikdash in 21 places. We also learned that the 3 places that the Kohanim guarded the Beis HaMikdash was an attic or a second floor room on the southern wall in the Beis Avtinas, where the Kohanim learned how to make Torahs. And Avtinas was a specialist in making and teaching how to make a Torahs. And so the room was named after him, Beis Avtinas, Lishkas Beis Avtinas. And that was on the southern wall. And a Kohen stood in that room, in that chamber, and guarded the Beis HaMikdash. And because there's a mitzvah that Leviim should always assist Kohanim, v'yilovu alecha v'yishasucha, wherever a Kohen guarded the Beis HaMikdash, there was a Levi who assisted him. But the Kohen took precedence. And therefore, when there were 2 floors, the Kohen stood on the top floor, and the Levi stood below on the first floor, on the ground floor. So, for example, in the Beis Avtinas, the Kohen stood in the chamber above, and the Levi stood below on the ground floor near the Beis Avtinas. There's a question whether it was 1 Kohen and 1 Levi, or 10 Kohanim and 10 Leviim in each place. So that's the first place the Kohanim guarded the Beis HaMikdash, and as we've learned, the Rambam tells us they did not guard the Beis HaMikdash to keep thieves out of the Beis HaMikdash. They guarded the Beis HaMikdash as a covenant. It's God's palace on earth. And again, we yearn to build God's palace on earth. And as we learn Masechta Middos, we're not becoming architects, as we've said so many times. We're not becoming architects how to build the Beis HaMikdash. We're learning Masechta Middos because through learning it, as we've mentioned, the Mefarshim say we're actually building the Beis HaMikdash and giving the Rebbeinu Shalom a tremendous nachas ruach that we yearn for him to be able to return to his palace on earth. So that's why the gods were there, because they were guarding a palace. The Rambam's language in Hilchos Beis Abchira is Ein Doima Platrin Shel Melech Sheyesh Lo Shoymim L'She'ein Lo Shoymim. You can't compare the palace that has official, dignified guards to a palace that doesn't have guards. In Lahavdol Elef Alfei Avdolos, you go to Buckingham Palace, you have the folks in those big black top hats, they're standing there, you can't make them smile, you can't make them laugh, because they're on duty guarding Buckingham Palace. And that's a covet for Buckingham Palace. And Malchusa Da'ara came Malchusa D'Rakia, Malchusa D'Rakia came Malchusa Da'ara, as we spoke about, the kingdom on earth, so that we can understand kingdom and sovereignty in heaven. God uses these kind of sort of Meshalem almost, examples, not parables, but examples, so that we can understand that a palace, when we see a palace, we expect to see guards, because then it's dignified. That's how our minds work, because that's what we see in Olam Hazeh. And therefore, God's palace on the Har HaBayis needs guards for its covet and its honor and its prestige. The second place where the Kohanim stood guard was on the northern wall, where the northern wall meets the western wall, northwest. There was again an attic, a second floor, which had a room in it called the Beis HaNitzutz. The Beis HaNitzutz was the room of the spark, and there was a fire in there. So if Chas v'Shalom, the fire on the Mizbeach got extinguished, they went to this room to bring fire to the Mizbeach. And in this room, a Kohen or 10 Kohanim stood guard, and below, on the ground floor, a Levi or 10 Leviim stood guard. Those are two of the three places. The third place where the Kohanim stood guard was in the Beis HaMoked. The Beis HaMoked was not an attic, it was a ground floor room, and it had many rooms, had several rooms inside it, which we're going to learn about later in the Masechta Yetz Hashem. And in this Beis HaMoked, a Kohen or 10 Kohanim stood inside, and a Levi or 10 Leviim stood outside. So in the first two places, Beis Artinas on the southern wall, Beis HaNitzutz on the northern wall, they were second level rooms. And the Kohen stood in that second floor room. The Levi stood on the ground floor. In the Beis HaMoked, which was also on the northern wall, but closer to the east, there was no second floor. So the Kohen got the more prestigious place, which is inside the Beis HaMoked, and the Levi stood outside Beis HaMoked. Now we're going to turn to learn the Mishnah, and we're on page Dalet of the Siyata D'Shmaya handout. And the Mishnah says, V'halaviyim ve'esrim ve'echad mako. The Leviim watched the Beis HaMikdash from 21 places. This is all learned out of Psukim, why the Kohanim were in 3 places with assistant Leviim, and why the Leviim were in 21 places. So it's altogether 24. Again, the Kohanim are in 3 places with Levi assistants. And in the 24 places, there are only Leviim. In order to understand where the Leviim were, before we actually take a look in the Mishnah, we need to go back to our diagram. And this is diagram, what we call diagram 1. You have to imagine yourself on Har HaZeisim, alive and well on Har HaZeisim, and you're looking now from east towards west. This is a bridge that connected the Har HaZeisim to the eastern gate of the Beis HaMikdash. And you walked from east to left, from east to west. On your left side, you have the southern wall, where we see the digs today and the 2 arches, which we call Shari Hulda. On your right is the northern wall, and of course, the Western Wall. And that's the perspective you have to have in your mind. Give me a moment. And now we're going to go to diagram number 2. And this is the key diagram for us today. When you're in Yerushalayim and you want to go to the Har HaBayis, there were 5 entrances to the Har HaBayis. The one at the bottom of the page is the eastern gate, not the gate to the Beis HaMikdash. It's the gate into the Har HaBayis. The Beis HaMikdash is a structure on the Har HaBayis, but doesn't occupy the whole Har HaBayis. The whole Har HaBayis, as you can see from the statement printed there, and it comes from the Mishnah, the whole Har HaBayis, before, we're not going to get into the complications of what Hordis did towards the end of the second Beis HaMikdash. We're going to leave that alone. He made it much bigger. But the Har HaBayis, as was known for purposes of our discussion, was 500 amos by 500 amos. Now, there's a question how big an amma is, but let's say an amma is a little over 2 feet. Okay, let's say an amma is a little over 2 feet. So the Har HaBayis that we're talking about is 1,000 feet by 1,000 feet. Inside that area was a Beis HaMikdash. We're not talking about yet entering the Beis HaMikdash. We are only talking about entering the Har HaBayis. So there were 5 gates. What the gates were used for, were they for entry and exit or for other things, we will learn about later. But there are 5 gateways. The one that's in the east is called Shar Shushan Habira. An interesting name, Shushan Habira. The reason it was called Shushan Habira is because, as we know, the Persian kings allowed us to start building the Beis HaMikdash, Koresh HaParsi. Then they interrupted the Binyan Beis HaMikdash. It continued interrupted in the times of Ahasuerus. And in the times of Ahasuerus' son, from Esther, according to a Kabbalah that we have, Dayavish 2, depending on how you count, allowed the Jews to finish the Beis HaMikdash. But when they finished building the Beis HaMikdash, either they were told by the Persian government, or they voluntarily did so as an act of gratitude, either way, to commemorate the fact that this second Beis HaMikdash was built with permission of the Persian government. The eastern gate into the Har HaBayis is called Shushan Habira. And if you take a look at the bottom of the page, the eastern gate to the Har HaBayis has the letter Gimel next to it, and the footnote says Gimel Shar Shushan. And that's what that Shar was known, Shar Shushan or Shar Shushan Habira. If you go to the northern gate, the northern side, there's only one opening into the Har HaBayis, and that is called Hay. And in your footnote, it tells you that's called Shar Teddy. It's not Teddy, English Teddy. It's not a nickname for Theodore. There's a reason why it's called Teddy, and we will see that when we get to Shar Teddy. Moving to the western, quote unquote, the western wall, not the western wall of the Beis HaMikdash, but the western wall of the Har HaBayis. There was again only one gate, and you can see there is a vav there. If you go to the bottom of your page, Vav, it says Shar Kipunus. Why was that gate called Shar Kipunus? We'll see that when we get to Shar Kipunus. If we go to the southern side, we see there are two gates. The gates have a bays next to them. If you go down to the bottom of the page, bays is, Share Hulda. And for some people, when they look at the southern wall, again, when we go to the coastal, the southern wall is on our right side. And we see the digs, we see the southern wall, and we see what looks like two arches or two entryways. And people call that, rightly or wrongly so, they call that Share Hulda, because there were two entryways into the Har HaBayis on the southern wall, which again, if you're standing at the coastal, it's to your right side. But if you're standing on Har HaZeisim and looking towards east to west, it would be on your left side. So now the Mishnah is going to talk about these entrances to the Har HaBayis. So we need to keep diagram 2 in front of us as we learn the Mishnah. So the Mishnah in the Siyata Dishmaya says, "V'halofiyim be'esrim ve'echad mokim." The Lofiyim guarded the Beis Hamikdash in 21 places. Chamisha al chamisha shari Har HaBayis. We just counted 5 entryways, 5 sha'orim into the Har HaBayis. 1 in the east, 1 in the north, 1 in the west, 2 in the south. 5 gates. At each of those 5 gates, there were a Levi or 10 Leviim guarding those 5 gates. So we have 5 places for the Leviim. Well, we have to get to 21. Arba, another 4 Leviim, al Arba Pinosov, at the 4 corners of the Har HaBayis. So if you go to your picture, there will be Leviim at each of the 5 gates, and then there'll be Leviim at each of the 4 corners of the Har HaBayis. So we have 9 so far, 5 at the gates and 4 at the corners. And now the Mishnah adds a critical word. The Mishnah says, mitocho. These Leviim were able to stand guard inside. In other words, the guards, the Leviim who stood guard in the corners, they didn't stand outside the wall of the Har HaBayis and guard the corner. They stood inside the wall of the Har HaBayis in the corner, inside the Har HaBayis, not the Beis Hamikdash. They stood inside the Har HaBayis at the 4 corners. The ones who guarded the 5 gates, they were able to stand, well, that's the point. I shouldn't say stand. They guarded at the inside of the doorways, not the outside of the doorways. So these 9 Leviim, the 4 corners of the Har HaBayis, they didn't stand at the outside of the wall in the corner. They stood inside the wall at the corner. And the 5 who stood guard at the entranceways, they didn't stand outside the entranceway to the Har HaBayis. They stood inside the entranceway to the Har HaBayis. Why? The reason is because they stood guard for many hours. We learned several days ago, the Rambam sheet and the sheet of most Rishonim is that the guards were there only during the nighttime. They did not guard the Beis Hamikdash during the daytime. The Minchas Chinuch had a question, if the guards are there just for the purposes of honor and prestige and not for thieves, they should be there during the day also, but that question, be that as it may be, the guards, as far as we're concerned, were there at night. But night's a long time. Night can be many hours. So now what do you do with guards who have to stand on their feet for 12 hours and they have to guard? So they don't have to stand on their feet. They're able to sit because you're allowed to sit on the Har HaBayis. So therefore, these guards were allowed to be inside the gate to the Harabayas and inside the corners of the Harabayas and guard the Harabayas from a sitting position. There's no problem. However, we're going to go now to the next 5 places and we'll see where there is a problem. So far we have 9 places for the Levium. 4 the corners of the Harabayas, 5 of the gates to the Harabayas. Now we're moving in to the Beis HaMikdash itself. We go back to diagram 2. We're now looking at the structure itself of the Beis HaMikdash. You've entered the Harabayas, and now you want to enter the Beis HaMikdash. Of course, the person has to be tahar. There are only certain places he can go in the Beis HaMikdash, but he wants to enter the Beis HaMikdash. There have to be entryways. There have to be gates. And there's a question about how many gates or doorways there were into the Beis HaMikdash itself. But we're going to leave that for now. And we're going to assume, as this Mishnah assumes for now, that there were 5 major entryways, 5 major gateways into the Beis HaMikdash itself. And you can see those in your picture. And sometimes you see more than them. But there are 5 major gateways into the Beis HaMikdash itself. And there, the Mishnah says, Chamisha al Chamisha Sharei HaZorah. An additional 5 Kohanim stood guard at the gateway to the Azorah, and Arba al Arba Pinoseha, another 4 Leviim stood guard at the corners of the Beis HaMikdash. So if we go back to diagram number 2, we see there are entry points in the Beis HaMikdash, and which 5 we're not going to detail right now. But of those entryways, the Levium stood guard at 5 entryways into the Beis HaMikdash itself, which we're calling now the Azorah. The Azorah is, so to speak, the anteroom, but it's part of the Beis HaMikdash. You go into the Azorah, and then you go further into the Beis HaMikdash. So these 5 gates into the Beis HaMikdash had Levium, and then the 5 corners of the Beis HaMikdash had Levium, just like the 5 corners of the 4 corners of the Harabayas had guards. The 4 corners of the Beis HaMikdash had guards. So just like the Harabayas had guards at its 5 gates and at its 4 corners, the inner structure called the Beis HaMikdash had guards at 5 gates and 4 corners. But now the Mishnah adds the next word, mi bachutz. The guards who guarded the Beis HaMikdash itself, they had to stand outside the guard posts. So the guards who guarded the corners of the Beis HaMikdash stood outside the corner, not inside the wall of the Beis HaMikdash at the corner. The guards who guarded, the Levium who guarded the 5 gateways into the Beis HaMikdash, they had to stand outside the gate, not inside the gate. So whereas the Levium who guarded the 4 corners of the Harabayas and the 5 entryways to the Harabayas were able to stand inside the entryway and inside the corners of the Harabayas, the Levium who guarded the 5 entryways into the Beis HaMikdash itself and guarded the 4 corners of the Beis HaMikdash itself, they had to stand outside the corners, not in the Beis HaMikdash in its corners, outside the corners, and they couldn't stand in the gateway to the Azorah. They had to stand outside the gateway of the Azorah. Now, why is that? So the Siyata D'Shmaya explains this to us. On page Vav of the Siyata D'Shmaya, page Zayin of the Siyata D'Shmaya, which begins mitocho. The Levium who guarded the Harabayas were able to guard it, the four corners and the 5 entryways from inside. Pirish mi befnim shel hachoma, delo kashomim shel ha'azora, sheyavu lekaman sheyushom michutz lechomas ha'azora. Again, guarding the Har Habayis by the Levium, they stood inside the 4 corners and inside the 5 gates. Guarding the Beis Hamikdash itself, the Levium stood outside the corner of the Beis Hamikdash, not inside the Beis Hamikdash at the corner, and outside the gateway. Why? So he continues, Uvi Gemara, Mefarshinan Hatam, Lama b'chomas harabayis shomer mitocho, u'b'chomas hazor mibachutz. Why did they have to watch from the outside if you're at the Beis Hamikdash, and you can watch from the inside if you're at the harabayis? Mishum dekaimalan, because we have a halacha. The also leishe be'ezus Yisrael chutz l'malchei beis David bilvad. No one is allowed to sit in the Ezras Yisrael. No one's allowed to sit in the Azorah. What the Ezras Yisrael is, and what the Ezras Kohanim is, and what these rooms are, and what these areas are. In Me'etz Hashem, we're going to construct them. Rabbi, I keep on thinking about it. We're not learning. We're learning fine. Rabbi Shalom's having a lot of nachas from our learning, but we're mamish constructing. We will soon, in Me'etz Hashem, when we get up there, we'll construct the Azorah. But right now, we're not up to constructing the Azorah. We're up to constructing walls and understanding how to guard those walls. There's a halacha that unless you're a scion of the Davidic dynasty and you're a king from the Davidic dynasty, you may not sit in the Azorah. You must remain standing in the Azorah. And so, on the Har Habayis, if you're guarding the 4 corners of the Har Habayis, or you're guarding the entryways to the Har Habayis, you can sit, because you're allowed to sit on the Har Habayis. So therefore, the Levium who guarded the 5 corners, the 4 corners of the Har Habayis, or guarded the 5 entryways to the Har Habayis, they were able to guard inside, because even though it was many hours that they guarded, they were able to sit and not have to stand on their feet, because you can sit in the area called the Har Habayis. But once you're in the Beis Hamikdash, you can't sit in the Beis Hamikdash in the Azorah. Only a scion of the Davidic dynasty can sit in the Azorah. And so if you're going to guard for so many hours, how do you guard? The only way to guard is if you're sitting outside the 5 gateways, so you're not inside the gateway. And the only way you can guard if you're at the corners is if you're outside the corner of the Beis Hamikdash. Because if you're inside the Beis Hamikdash in its corners, you can't sit, you have to stand. If you were inside the gateway, you would have to stand, you couldn't sit. That's why when you're guarding the Beis Hamikdash, you can be guarding the Har Habayis, the Levium guarding the Har Habayis, were able to guard the 4 corners inside the Har Habayis, the 5 gateways inside the gateways. When it came to the Beis Hamikdash, the Levium at the corners had to stand outside the Beis Hamikdash at the corners. They had to stand outside the 5 entryways because you couldn't sit. Now this idea that you couldn't sit, but before we do that, let's just finish this concept of the 21 places. So far we have 18. 5 gates to the Har Habayis, 4 corners of the Har Habayis, 9. 5 gateways into the Beis Hamikdash, 4 corners of the Beis Hamikdash, another 9. So we have 18. We need 21. So the Mishnah on page 9 of the Siyata Dishmaya continues. Arba pinoseo mibachutz. The Echad on page Ches of the Siyata Dishmaya. The Echad Belishkas HaKorban, another guard place, was in the room called the Lishkas HaKorban, which Belineda will deal with tomorrow. The Echad Belishkas HaParoches, Another guard place was in a place called the room of the paroches, Lishkas HaParoches, and one guard station for Levium was behind the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Kodesh HaKadoshim is called Beis HaKapores because that's where the Kapores was. The Kapores is what covered the Aron, and the Kapores were the Kruvim. And God spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu. His message came down. Again, if you hear closely and you're listening to the message came from Mibein Shnei HaKruvim Me'al HaKapores. So if you take a look in your Siyata Dishmaya on page test, a different picture, you will see all these places. There is the Lishkas HaParoches, and at the top there's Achorei Beis HaKapores. Now I just want to explain this for a moment, and I'm going to go back to diagram number 2. We already know that the Beis HaMikdash did not occupy the whole Har HaBayis. There was room in front of the Beis HaMikdash to the east, there was room to the south, there was room to the north, and there was a little room to the west. So whatever place you were on the Har HaBayis, the Beis HaMikdash did not occupy that whole Har HaBayis. So when we're looking at the west, between the question exactly where it is, we'll build that when we get to it, but the wall, the western wall of the Beis HaMikdash, not the western wall of the Har HaBayis, the western wall of the Beis HaMikdash had a space between it and the wall of the Har HaBayis. And somewhere there was a room, not saying exactly where, we'll learn about where it was when we construct that room later in the Masechta. There was another room, there was a room there, and that was another guard point for the Levium. So in sum, the Kohanim guarded the Beis HaMikdash in 3 places. Lishkas Haftinas, the Ketores room on the southern wall, Beis HaNitzutz on the northern wall, northwestern wall, and in those 2 places, Beis Haftinas, Beis HaNitzutz, the Kohen was above, the Levi was below, or 10 above and 10 below. The 3rd place the Kohanim guarded was the Beis HaMoked, also on the northern wall, and the Kohen was inside, the Levi was outside. Today we've learned about the 21 places that the Levium guarded. First they guarded the Har HaBayis, 5 gates, and they were able to stand inside the gate because there's no problem sitting on the Har HaBayis. They guarded the 5 corners of the Har HaBayis from the inside of the corners of the wall, because that's the Har HaBayis and you can sit on the Har HaBayis. So we have 9. 9 more places were the Levium guarding the 4 corners of the Beis HaMikdash itself, but they had to stand outside. I shouldn't say stand. They had to guard from outside the corners because otherwise they couldn't sit, because only a scion of the Davidic dynasty can sit. So they guarded the Beis HaMikdash in its 4 corners from the outside point to the corner. And another 5 places were the 5 gates into the Beis HaMikdash itself. And again, they had to stand outside. Again, I used the word stand. They had a guard from outside the gate so that they would be able to sit during these long hours. So that's 5 and 4, 9, 5 and 4, 9. And then there are additional 3, which we're going to learn about: the Lishkas HaKorban, Lishkas HaParoches, and Lachorei Beis HaKapores. Those are the additional 3, that's 21. So the Kohanim guarded in 3 places with a Levi assisting, and the Levium guarded in 21 places. So our holy Beis HaMikdash on the Har HaBayis, God's palace on this earth, had 24 guards, 3 places Kohanim with the assistance of Levium, 21 places Levium, and this was done to give prestige and honor to God's palace on earth. This idea that only a scion of the Davidic dynasty can sit inside the Azorah or the Beis HaMikdash is one of the reasons that led to the breakup between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. We learn in Malachim Aleph, as we learned in the Novi Shir, after Shlomo died, his son Rechavam became king. Certain issues with Rechavam. The issues that appear from the Novi are he was a high taxation sovereign. He taxed the people heavily for different reasons. And the Havdol Elef Alfei Havdolas, there was sort of a Boston Tea Party against Rechavam. People wanted to revolt against this high taxation. In the midst of all this arrived someone called Yerovam ben Nevat. And Yerovam ben Nevat is approached by a Navi whose name is Shmaya. This is in Malachim Aleph Perek Yud Beis. And Shmaya tells Yerovam in the name of God that, Achia Hashiloni, Malachim Aleph Perek Yud Beis, Navi Achia Shiloni informs Yerovam ben Nevat that he is going to become the king of a northern kingdom, and the kingdom's going to be split. The Davidic dynasty will continue in the south, basically Yerushalayim and its environs, with Yehuda and Binyamin under their dominion. For the most part, the other 10 tribes will be part of the northern kingdom, and you, Yerovam ben Nevat, will be God's selected king over the northern kingdom. Yerovam ben Nevat at this point is a very, very big, tremendous Talmud Chacham, we know. And if God picked him to be the king, it was a tzaddik. In Malachim Aleph Yud Beis, a yontif is approaching. One of the Sholosh Regalim is approaching. The Sholosh Regalim approach. And now we have the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim, with Rechavam the king in the south, Yerovam ben Nevat the king of 10 tribes in the north. Now the question came up in the north, what do we do? Do we go down to Yerushalayim, down south, to the Beis HaMikdash? Or do we not go to the Beis HaMikdash? What do we do? We have our own separate kingdom here. What should we do? So the pasuk in Malachim Aleph Perek Yud Beis, pasuk Chavav, says, "Vayomer Yerovam belibo." Yerovam said to himself, "Ata toshuv hamamlocha lebeis David." If the people from my northern kingdom travel to Yerushalayim for Yontif, the end result will be that I will lose my kingship here up north, and that everybody will again become part of one kingdom ruled by Rechavam. Why? And Pasuk Chav Zayin continues, Im yale ha'om hazeh lasei zevochem bebeis Hashem b'Yerushalayim, v'shov leif ha'om hazeh el Adoneim el Rechavam melech Yehuda v'haraguni, v'shov el Rechavam melech Yehuda. If the Jews go to Yerushalayim and they'll bring their karbonos for Yontif in Yerushalayim, their hearts will turn back to Rechavam, they will kill me. And Rashi comments, this comes from a Gemara, where did he get this thought from, that if there's 2 kingdoms, one north, one south, God told Yerovam to be the king of the north through Achia Hashaloni, the holy Navi. So he's the king of the north. But when Yontif comes, he goes to the Beis HaMikdash. What led him to believe that if he goes to the Beis HaMikdash, they're going to kill him? He's God's chosen king of the north. Why does he think anyone's going to kill him if he goes to the Beis HaMikdash? Rashi. Ein yeshiva ba'azorah el malchus beis David bilvad. V'yehu yoshev ani omed. I'm going to go to the Beis HaMikdash, Yerovam says to himself, with all my people. We're going to bring karbonos in the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. What is the inside of the Beis HaMikdash going to look like? there will be only one throne, one chair in the Beis HaMikdash in the Azorah, because only a scion of the Davidic dynasty can sit in the Azorah. And who's going to be sitting on that throne, that chair? Rechavam. I will have to remain standing because I'm not a scion of the Davidic dynasty. And when people see this picture, that there's only one throne and Rechavam is sitting on it, they will come to the conclusion that there really is only one king. Because if you, Yerovam, were king, why aren't you sitting like Rechavam? So it must be only one king, and this whole second Malucha business is a fraud, and you're a fraud, and therefore they're going to kill me, Yerovam. And that's what Yerovam said to himself. Therefore, the pasuk continues right after that, Melachim Aleph Yud Beis Chav Ches, Vayivoatz HaMelech, the Melech took an Eitzah, he decided, Vayashne Eglei Zor, he made two Agolim, he made two Avodah Zoros. Vayomru Aleim Rav Lochem Alos Yerushalayim, and he told his people in the northern kingdom, it's enough, we don't need to go to Yerushalayim. Hinei Elohecha Yisrael Asher Haluchem Eretz Mitzrayim. These are the gods who took you out of Mitzrayim. Meshiggah. He's a God-appointed king for the north, and his ego got in his way. If he would go down to Yerushalayim, Rechavam would be sitting, he would have to be standing, and then what's going to look like? So better to stay in the north. Tell the Jewish people you don't need Yerushalayim. You don't need the Beis HaMikdash, because we up here in the north have two Avodah Zoros, and we worship these Avodah Zoros. Vayosem eso echad bebeit el, ve'eso echad nosan b'don. And he put one of these Avodah Zoros in Beit El, and one of these Avodah Zoros he put in the area that Shevet Dan lived in. And that's how the Malucha eventually split into the disaster that it was. It was, Rabban Shalom wanted there to be two Maluchas for a short period of time, we're told. Short period of time. And mankind, Jewish people, by their own actions, lengthened, deepened, and worsened the break between the Jewish people themselves. The northern and southern kingdom were God decreed for a short time. The northern kingdom should have been coming down to the Beis HaMikdash and worshiping the same God in the same Beis HaMikdash. But Yerovam had this idea that, how is it going to look for me? Spasnish. Rechavam's going to be sitting, I'm going to be standing, because nobody can sit in the Beis HaMikdash in the Azorah except a sign of King David. You know what? Poo on the whole thing. No Beis HaMikdash. No Yerushalayim. We're going to worship these two silly Agolim, which the Jews already were nichshalin in the Middos. Two Agolim. We'll put one on the highway in Beit El, one on the highway in Dan, and that's it. People want to go worship, they can go to Beit El, they can go to Dan, and we don't have to go to Yerushalayim anymore. And for those who learn Malachim, we know as the situation continues, it deteriorates. The Avodah Zarah gets worse and worse. Worse and worse and worse and worse. And the karbonos that are offered to these Avodah Zarah constantly become worse and worse. And bomos, private altars are built, and it gets worse and worse and worse until, unfortunately, the ultimate destruction of the northern kingdom, which occurred before the destruction of the southern kingdom, the Golus Aseres Hashmotim, which have still not returned, and they are where they are, and B'mher Yameinu they will return, but they're still in their own Golus there. The southern kingdom eventually later went into Golus as well, and the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. And much of this deterioration occurred because of this rule that Yerovam ben Nebat simply couldn't stomach, that he'll go to Yerushalayim and serve the Rabbeinu Shalom. He's appointed to be king by the Rabbeinu Shalom. Who he is from the Rabbeinu Shalom. But who he is became more important than who the Rabbeinu Shalom is. He's king. And to make sure that he remains king, he's going to do this unbelievable thing and create avodah zarah where people will deny that God is king, all to save his own kingship. And this led to the deterioration that results in the Churban Beis Hamikdash, the first Churban bias. So there's a lot to learn from what caused the deterioration. And it begins with this halacha that we learned today, this very important halacha. It sounds like it's just some halacha. Only a sign of the Davidic dynasty can sit in the Azorah. And that's why the Leviim who guarded the Beis Hamikdash itself and the gates to the Beis Hamikdash itself had to sit outside the gates and outside the walls because they couldn't sit in the Azorah. But the Leviim who guarded the Har HaBayis were able to be on the inside of the gates and the inside of the corners. And all of this is because there's a halacha from the Rebbeinu Shalom that the only people that sit in the Beis Hamikdash are signs of the Davidic dynasty. Yerovim couldn't stomach that. The deterioration of that became incredible until Nebuch, the Churban Beis Hamikdash. And that's something to think about. When a person's self-ego and his self-importance and who he is and what he is and where he is and his station in life become more important than who the Rebbeinu Shalom is, that situation will deteriorate and deteriorate until Chas v'Shalom there's a Churban. The only way we avoid Churban and the only way we undo Churban is by making sure the Rebbeinu Shalom is the Rebbeinu Shalom and we're his servants. The Rebbeinu Shalom is not our servant. We're his servants. And as part of being his servants, we want to build him a palace. And as we learn Masechta Middos every day, we're not just learning Masechta Middos, say this over and over, we're building a Beis Hamikdash. Baruch Hashem, so far, we've looked at the walls of the Har HaBayis, we've looked at the walls of the Beis Hamikdash, and we now understand who guards these walls that we've built. Baruch Hashem, we have a nice participation in the Shir. It's a tremendous nachas ruach to the Rebbeinu Shalom. And there are more people that watch it as a recording. Tell your friends that you're building a Beis Hamikdash, they can join you. Let everybody join in this wonderful project, not learning Masechta Middos. It's the project, courtesy of Masechta Middos, that we can build a Beis Hamikdash M'her Yameinu. Now we'll turn to the DaAs Tevunos. DaAs Tevunos, again, written by the Ramchal as a dialogue, an internal dialogue between the Neshama and its Seichel. The Neshama has questions for the Seichel. And the Neshama's basic premise is, that's the Ramchal Shita, we talked about this, Chayvis Alvov, Shalom, many other people, that things that we believe in are not enough to believe in them as a principle of faith. You have to understand what you believe in. And this is premise number one on the pasuk. V'yadata hayoyim v'hashevose elovavecha ki Hashem walakim b'shemayim imal v'lorat mitochas ein oid. You have to know v'yadata hayom. You have to know that there's a God in heaven and there's a God on earth. Ein od, and there's no other God. No other God doesn't mean that I don't believe in a second God. It doesn't mean that only that I believe in the perfect unity of God. It means that, as the Ramchal is going to explain, the cardinal principle in all of this is Ein Od, is Gilui Hayichud. It is to reveal to mankind, to ourselves and to mankind. It is an understanding, it is a thought that God is Shalit Bakol. God is the sovereign over everything. He's in control of everything. He is the pilot in the airplane. He is the captain of the ship. He didn't leave the world to a Hefkeveld. There is no chaos, and I say this over and over in the situation that we're in. Ani mamin b'emunah shalema she'anachnu lo chayim b'chaos, anachnu chayim b'olamo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu shehu misudar. I believe that I do not live in a chaotic world. I live in a world that is being dealt with in a very systematic, precise approach by the Ribbono Shel Olam. I may not like the approach. I may not understand fully the approach, but chas v'sholom, I should ever think that the place is running as a hefkevel. Chas v'sholom, I should ever think that way. It's running with a cheshbon, with a cheshbon. And so we need to not only have principles of faith, we need to understand why we believe in things. V'yodata hayom, and then v'hashevos elavavecha. So the neshama said to the seichel, the 13 animamins, I understand and believe 9 of them, but there are 4 that I believe because my father told me, his grandfather told him, and all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu taught us from the Ribbono Shel Olam that there are these additional 4 principles. And I believe in it because Moshe taught it to us, but I don't understand how they work. And those 4 are Hashgacha. God is actually administering and taking care of the world. Schar v'onesh, reward and punishment. Bias HaMashiach, and Chias HaMesim. I believe in these things. I certainly believe in these things, but I can't explain them. And the Seichel asked the Neshama, why can't you understand them? What's your problem? And the Neshama said, because there's Mesibois Mishapich. The world is running counter to all of these 4 principles. It absolutely looks like it's a hefkeveld out there. Evil appears to succeed. Good appears not to be doing so well. Where is the principal? The principal seems to have left the room. He left the schoolhouse. Everybody's running around wild, doing whatever they want. There's no mashgiach here, no hashgacha chas v'sholom. And if there's no mashgiach, there's nobody to give out reward and punishment because there's nobody here looking at what people are doing. And obviously, if there's nobody here in the world that I'm looking at to give out reward and punishment, how do you want me to understand the reward of Bias Mashiach and Chias HaMesim? No one's ever seen it. If I can't even believe in these concepts, I take back the word believe. If I can't even understand these concepts in the world in which I live, I can't understand Hashgacha or Schar v'onesh in the world I live in. How am I to understand it in the world that no one's yet ever seen? So the Seichel told the Neshama, I can only tell you some general principles from which you can understand how God runs the world and how God runs an individual's life. But if you want the particulars we can't get into because I don't understand it. Even Moshe Rabbeinu didn't understand it. And of course, as we learned yesterday, this brings us to the ultimate question. The Ramchal says, the Gemara says in Brachos that Moshe Rabbeinu asked God, why are there tzaddikim that have good lives? Why are there tzaddikim, on the other hand, who suffer? Why are there Rishoyim that have good lives? And why, on the other hand, are there Rishoyim that suffer? Tzaddik v'toivloi, tzaddik v'raloi, Rosha v'toivloi, Rosha v'raloi. And according to one sheet in the Gemara in Brachos, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Moshe Rabbeinu, I can't explain this to you because you'll never understand it. And Rav Friedlander, in his commentary in the DaAs Tevunos on page Beis of your DaAs Tevunos, Rav Friedlander explained that the problem with the particulars is only God knows the particulars. The general issue, why does God need in his perfect, precise, systematic running of the world, why does he need a concept in which some good suffer and some good succeed? Some evil suffer and some good succeed. Why does he have to have that part of his system? That I will explain to you, the Ramchal says, why that is a necessary part of a perfect, precise system that's being run by God. What I can tell you is why Tzaddik Aleph got the successful life and why Tzaddik Beis got the life of Yisurim. Those are the particulars. I cannot tell you why God chose this tzaddik's neshama to be successful and this tzaddik's neshama to suffer. That no one will know. That comes from the most private inner sanctum of God. That's how God divvied up the jobs. This tzaddik will be toivloi, this tzaddik not bechraloi, this Rasha toivloi, this Rasha raloi. That's how God divvied up the jobs. Why he divvied it up in that particular way, no one knows. But what we do believe is tzaddik v'yoshahu. God divided the jobs in the most precise, fair, just way, given all the circumstances of how the world has to run. This is a very, very complicated place to run. Think about it. Rav Aryeh Kaplan Zichron Tzaddik Livracha wrote a book, If I Were God, and I believe at the beginning he even quotes the Ramchal, the idea of maybe I can do a better job if I ran the world. You don't want to run the world. You don't want to have to be responsible for every blade of grass and every insect and where every mosquito goes and which butterfly flaps its wings in what direction. And that's only, we're talking about the earth. We're talking about there's a Milky Way and there are universes outside the Milky Way, and they all have to somehow interact together in a perfect, precise system. This is not a system that can work independent of each other. You can ask astronomers about how important it is, just as a most basic example, that the sun, the moon, and the earth work in a rhythm. Because if they go out of rhythm, there's going to be a tremendous amount of destruction. Everything has to work in a perfect rhythm, including the creations on earth. Men, women, children, Jews, Goyim, everything, animals, everything has to work in a system. It needs a system, and God administers that system. We can know the general rules, why there is built into the system successful tzaddikim and not successful tzaddikim, but why this one was picked for success and this was picked for Yisurim, we don't go there. It's God's private cheshbonos. Okay, so we're on page Gimel, and Rav Friedlander's caption that he put into the DaAs Tevunos says as follows: Kidei lehetiv rotz Hashem she'odem yashlim chesonosav. In order for God to be mativ, to do good, to bestow good on creation, he left man the opportunity to perfect himself. And therefore, God created a perfectly imperfect world. I mentioned many times when we learned the DaAs Tevunos, I was once in a store with my wife, and they had a dish, like a serving dish, and I think the store was Verdenon. They had a dish, the dish said in it, perfectly imperfect. And I really wanted to buy the dish just to frame it and hang it up. It was very expensive, so I didn't have permission to buy the dish. But then I was on a tiyul with my wife. We went into a store, and there was a t-shirt. And the t-shirt says, perfectly imperfect. And that was cheap enough for me to be able to get permission to buy. So I bought the t-shirt. But tomorrow, I forgot to bring with me, I will show everyone the t-shirt, perfectly imperfect. And this is the introduction of the Ramchal now. God created a perfect, imperfect world. In other words, it's exactly as imperfect as it needs to be. It's at the point of imperfection, which is precisely imperfect. Just enough imperfection that there's room for me and you and all of us to perfect the Bria and become partners with God in creation. So let's see what the Ramchal says. Yud Beis, Amar HaSeichel, the Seichel said, Ach ma shetzorach levar rishona, the first thing that we need to explain, hu inyan metzias ha'adam v'ha'avoda hamutelas alo. We need to understand man's existence and the avoda. What job is man required to do? What is man's existence and what's his job? To understand what is the goal of all of this. This is very important word, goal. People do things hopefully with goals. If they do things without any goal in mind, it usually means that they went, for example, on vacation somewhere, and they just need to rest. They need to chill out. The goal is chill out. How do you chill out? You just take a book, maybe read the book, kind of book that will not make you think about much, and you just chill out. And everybody needs to chill out. Because if you sit over a Gemara 24/7, except if you're one of the Tzadikei Olam, you can burn out your mind. If you're intensely thinking all the time, with the goal of acquiring knowledge, you can burn out. So sometimes people have to do things with a tachlis, go on vacation, but the tachlis is not to have any tachlis. I'm going on vacation just to chill out. What do you want to accomplish on your vacation? You want to make a siyum Masechta? You want to learn Shisha Sidrei Mishnah? What do you want to do on your vacation? I want to write a new computer program for work. That's not why you went on vacation. The tachlis of going on vacation is that you'll have a place where there's no real tachlis. You just want a vacation. Man has such an idea of going to a tachlis that has no tachlis. And some people call that bizbuz hazman. I'm burning out. Let's take a ride to the mall and walk around. But my credit card is maxed out and we have no cash. What do you want to go to the mall for? I just want to go to the mall and walk around. I need to chill out. But there's no tachlis. You can't buy anything. The tachlis is not a tachlis. It just, the tachlis is that there's no tachlis. I just need to chill out. In God's world, there's no such thing as something that doesn't have a tachlis. God doesn't go on vacation. Everything that happens in the world and everything he does has a tachlis. There's a goal to it. And it's a systematic approach to a goal. There is nothing that happens in the world, nothing that doesn't have a goal. It's said over in the name of the Baal Shem Tov that if a person looks at a tree and sees a leaf falling off the tree and believes that, big deal, some coincidence, a leaf fell off the tree, a wind came, whatever it is, a person has to question his emunah. What do you mean something happened in the world and it's no big deal? Something happened in the world and God didn't control it. What are you talking about? The leaf fell off the tree because it's part of a greater system that God is operating with absolute precision. That leaf fell off the tree for a God-mandated plan. Everything that God has, everything that God does is for a tachlis. That is a key word. So the Ramchal says that I need to understand man's existence and the job that man has. Ladas mahu hatachlis hanetza b'chol zos. I need to understand what God's goal is in all this. Why do I need to understand God's goal? Because if I know what God's goal is, I can work towards that goal. The bottom line meaning of being an Oved Hashem, of serving God, means that God has a goal and I want to accomplish that goal for him. And in that way, I serve Hashem. That is Avodas Hashem. If you don't understand what God's goals are, you can be doing a lot of things that are not Avodas Hashem because they're not the goal. So you need to understand, the Ramchal says, what the goal of man's creation was and what the goal of his avodah is, so you can satisfy your avodas Hashem. Yud Gimel. Omer HaNeshama, the Neshama said, Zeh vaday inyan shemavakish iyun harbe lahavino al buyo b'chol chalaka. This is certainly a question that is very deep and needs a lot of analysis of what the goal is of creation of man and man's job in that creation. We're going to begin Yud Dalet today just to get the concept of perfectly imperfect. And for the time being, as we go through the DaAs Tevunos, keep those words in mind. God created a perfectly imperfect world because he loves me. And why did he create the perfectly imperfect world? Because he asked me, to join him in perfecting the world. So I can be his partner in the ultimate finishing of creation. The Mefarshim say, including, I believe, the Arachaim HaKadosh, we say in Vayechulu, at the end of Vayechulu, Asher bara Elokim la'asos. At the end of 6 days, this is what God created la'asos, to do. That's a future tense. It should say Asher bara Elokim va'asa. These are the things that God created and made, past tense. It says Asher bara Elokim la'asos. This is the things that God created to do, to make. The Mefarshim tell us that the lasos is talking about us, each of us, you and me. Man has a job to do, la'asos. This perfectly imperfect world, God wants to make it perfect. And he left the last part of making it perfect to us. And then we become partners in HaKadosh Baruch Hu in creation. The Gemara in Shabbos says, Kala Oma Vayechulu be'erev Shabbos, Na'aseh shutef la'Kadosh Baruch Hu b'ma'aseh bereishis. Hear the words? Na'aseh shutef la'Kadosh Baruch Hu b'ma'aseh bereishis. If you say Vayechulu on erev Shabbos, we're not going to go into why it says erev Shabbos, but if you say Vayechulu, and again, Vayechulu doesn't mean you say it and you murmur it. If you say Vayechulu and you understand Vayechulu, and you understand what it means for you, Vayechulu, and that the last words of Vayechulu are lasos, that you must contribute to the completion and perfection of the world, the Gemara says, Nasa shutef, la'Kadosh Baruch Hu b'ma'aseh bereishis. You become partners with God in creating the world. So we're going to start a little of Yudalit. And Rabbi said we're doing an unbelievable thing here every morning. First, we learn Masechta Middos, where we're building God's palace. And then we go to DaAs Tevunos, and we're learning about what God wants us to do in our lives in order to serve him in that palace, and when that palace is built, and in a way that will help bring about the building of that palace. It's an unbelievable combination, Rabbi Isai, to learn Masechta Middos about building the Beis HaMikdash, and then turning to the Ramchal, who tells us how to serve Hashem, and the ultimate service place is in the Beis HaMikdash. So in Yudalid, the Seichel says, Amar HaSeichel, Hayesoid Harishon She'olav Oimid Kol HaBinyan Hu, the principle, foundation, upon which the whole universe is built. There's one fundamental principle. Now in Pirkei Avos, there is the Mishnah, and the first Mishnah in the first parak, and the last Mishnah in the first parak about Shloshet Dvarim Ha'olam Omei. That's talking about something else. He's talking about conceptually now. There's one principle upon which all of creation was made and continues to be administered. Husherotza, and this is the Yesod Harishon She'olav Oimid Kol HaBinyan. It's the foundational principle upon which the whole structure stands. Sharotza Haratzon Ha'elyon, God's ultimate will. We talk about will because we don't talk about God's needs, chas v'sholom. God doesn't need anything. But God had a will, and this will be developed later in the Ramchal. What does it mean that God has a will? But for now, God had a will. This is what he wants. Sheyeh ha'odam mashlim es atzmoi ve'es kol hanivra b'shvil. God, the fundamental principle of the whole universe, is that God created it perfectly and perfect, so that ha'odam mashlim es atzmoi, man can have the opportunity to perfect himself, ve'es kol hanivra b'shvilo, and all of the creations that were created everywhere for the purpose of man, the trees, the animals, the rocks, everything. It was all created to give man an opportunity to use these things to perfect himself. And by perfecting himself, he elevates the rest of the Bria to their level of perfection. And by man perfecting the imperfect person, and helping in the process all together, hand in hand, Yetz Hashem, hand in hand, perfecting the whole Bria, that becomes our zuchus, that becomes our merit, uschorai, and it becomes our reward. It means two different things. Ramchal will explain that tomorrow. But by us working on perfecting an imperfect world, that becomes our merit, and that becomes our reward. We should be zeicha that our learning of Masechta Middos each day becomes a nachas ruach to the Rebbeinu Shalom. It should create within us a yearning to see the Beis HaMikdash, and the yearning to see it is part of its construction, as we mentioned. And we should also be zeicha to understand better who we are, what the Rebbeinu Shalom wants from us, what the goal of all this is. And we should be able to take away each day and pass on to our friends, our family, that God forbid we're not living in chaos. We may not like the situation. We would have preferred maybe a different situation. But we're living in a system that God is running with precise perfection to the millisecond. And to every iota that a fact that occurs, God is running a perfect world. Have a wonderful day, Rabbi Isai. We'll meet again tomorrow. Thank you again to Shmuel Eliwad for making the Zoom possible. Sei gesund, everybody.